My name is Eleonora, but everyone calls me Nora. 2 nights ago, at my sister's engagement party, she called me a poor trash worker in front of our entire family. The thing is, they were all sitting in a restaurant that I had poured my soul into building. They had no idea. Not yet. But worse than the insult itself was the chilling familiarity of it. The way being erased from my own family felt like just another course on the evening's menu. Nobody defended me. Not my mother, not my father, not even my brother. Then a guest at another table looked around and asked, "What's the owner doing eating with the guests?" And in that instant, the entire facade cracked wide open. Have you ever felt completely invisible in a room you built with your own 2 hands? The text message arrived just after 3 p.m. My phone buzzed against the stainless steel counter of the test kitchen, where I was experimenting with a new menu concept. The vibration was a jarring interruption to my focus. It was from my mother, Catherine. A rare enough event to make my heart skip a beat. The message itself was brutally brief, an exercise in cold efficiency. Engagement dinner for Serafina and Julian. Thursday at 7. The Gilded Grove. No warm greeting, no signature. And of course, absolutely no acknowledgement that the Gilded Grove was my restaurant. They didn't know. How could they? I had never announced it to them. After all, this was the same family who once told me that my work in sustainable waste management wasn't real entrepreneurship. The irony that they had chosen my flagship establishment, likely assuming it was just chic and exclusive enough for Serafina's public image, landed like a stone in my stomach. I wiped my hands on a fresh towel and stared at the phone screen, letting the sheer absurdity of the situation wash over me. For a moment, I considered not going. A part of me, the part that was still desperately trying to grow a thicker skin, screamed at me to protect my own peace. But another quieter voice, the voice of the girl they had spent years trying to erase, whispered, "Show up. Let them sit in the space you created." And so I texted back a simple, "I'll be there." On Thursday evening, I arrived 10 minutes early. Charleston was experiencing an unseasonably warm spring, and the evening light was still soft and golden as I stepped out of my rideshare onto the cobblestone street. I was wearing a charcoal gray wrap dress, understated but impeccably tailored, with my hair pulled back in a simple knot. It was a look that would never be flashy enough for Catherine's taste, but it made me feel grounded and confident. The polished brass sign for the Gilded Grove gleamed subtly, catching the last rays of sunlight. I took a deep breath and, for the first time in months, walked in through the main entrance. Daniel, our floor manager, was standing near the host stand. His eyes widened just a fraction when he saw me. Typically, I entered through the back kitchen entrance or came for late-night meetings, never as a regular guest. He gave me a discreet, knowing nod, saying nothing. Hope the Eco Queen remembered deodorant. Read the caption on an Instagram story I pulled up while I waited. Serafina had posted it that afternoon, a filtered image of a dumpster with a glittery tiara emoji photoshopped on top. My name wasn't tagged, but the timing and the tone were unmistakable. She always did prefer her cruelty served with a smile. A young server, a new hire I realized, approached me. "Ma'am, would you mind helping with the spill near table 6? He asked, gesturing toward a small puddle of water near the back. I blinked, then managed a gentle smile. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "Oh," he stammered, his face flushing crimson as Daniel swiftly moved in. "She's with the Montgomery party," Daniel said with calm authority. The server mumbled an apology and scurried away. I let it go. Tonight wasn't about correcting every single misperception. It was about observing. And maybe, just maybe, reclaiming a small piece of myself. The family was already seated, of course, at the best table in the house, right beneath the massive, custom-made brass chandelier I had commissioned from a local artist. Catherine was draped in pale pink silk, her expression one of someone merely tolerating the moment. My father, Richard, was already scrolling through his phone. Serafina, eternally poised, wore an ivory dress with a string of pearls, her arm looped possessively through Julian's. The man looked like he had just stepped out of a LinkedIn profile picture. Sharp suit, firm handshake, and absolutely no soul behind his eyes. I approached the table slowly. Catherine offered me an air kiss, her heavy gardenia perfume enveloping me. "Eleonora," she said, her tone the one she usually reserved for the waitstaff. "You're early." "On time, actually," I replied softly, glancing at the clock on the wall. Serafina offered her cheek without getting up. "You look comfortable," she commented, her eyes raking over my simple dress. Julian gave me a firm nod, his smile polite but completely vacant. "Nice to meet you," he said, as if we hadn't briefly met at a business conference 2 years prior. I hadn't bothered to introduce myself properly then, and he clearly hadn't remembered me now. Champagne was poured. The conversation immediately turned to wedding plans, guest lists, venue logistics, and honeymoon destinations. I sipped my drink quietly, feeling myself become more and more invisible. Occasionally, a crumb of inclusion would be tossed my way. When I mentioned a new sustainability grant I was working on, Catherine just blinked and said, "That sounds pleasant." Dinner service began. The staff moved with the quiet efficiency I had personally trained into them. I found myself noticing every little detail. The precise temperature of the plates, the artistry of the garnishes, the way the light pooled around the centerpiece without creating a glare for the diners. Every single element whispered of my hard work and vision, a language none of my family could understand. During the first course, Catherine turned to me. "That dress," she said with a slight tilt of her head, "is very practical. Just like your work, I imagine." I forced a tight smile. "It serves its purpose." Richard cleared his throat and raised his glass. "To Julian," he declared, his voice booming. "To the man who will elevate this family's name, our vision, our future." A chorus of clinking glasses followed. Serafina beamed. Catherine nodded with teary-eyed approval. No one so much as glanced in my direction. I raised my own glass anyway, the bubbles catching the low, warm light. Inside me, something shifted. They were toasting a man who had no idea where he was. In a room I had built, with cutlery I had hand-selected, dining on a menu I had personally designed. And yet, I wasn't even part of their toast. I don't know what I was expecting when I returned to that table. Gratitude, perhaps? Or at the very least, some form of acknowledgement. But what I received was just more of the same, only this time wrapped in fine linens and polite, empty smiles. The clinking of silverware against expensive porcelain was meant to mask the sharp cutting edges of our conversations, but I could hear every single slice. Richard leaned across the table, speaking to Julian with that paternal warmth he reserved exclusively for men he considered worthy. "This wedding will open doors for you, son. Connections like the Hastings and the Gelmans don't come easy, but they'll be lining up for you now." Catherine, ever the social strategist, chimed in proudly, mapping out the seating chart and who they had placed next to whom. My name was never mentioned. I glanced around the table. Every single person had been asked about their work, their recent travels, their children. But me? Nothing. I might as well have been a decorative plant in the corner. When the appetizers arrived, Catherine turned to me with that perfectly rehearsed smile she wore to every gala, fundraiser, and photo shoot. Still doing that thing with, public sanitation. The words came out as if she had just stepped in something unpleasant. I didn't even blink. "Still doing that thing," I replied. "Only now there's a waiting list to learn how." She let out a small, dismissive chuckle as if I were just being cheeky. "Well, everyone needs a purpose, I suppose," she said, "even if it's a little unorthodox." I caught Julian watching the exchange, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he'd never witnessed someone being so politely eviscerated at a dinner table before. Richard stood again, raising his glass. "To Julian," he declared, his voice smooth and practiced. "To the man whose drive, vision, and integrity will lead this family into the future." The table erupted in applause. Serafina beamed, her engagement ring catching the candlelight perfectly. Catherine's eyes welled up with tears, though whether it was from pride or the expensive Chardonnay, I couldn't tell. I lifted my glass too, but not for him. As I took a sip, a thought clawed its way to the surface of my mind. I built the very chair you're sitting on, and yet I'm the one no one sees. A few minutes later, a distant cousin, Chloe I think her name was, asked, "So Eleonora, what exactly is it that you do?" A simple question. Too simple. Before I could even open my mouth, Serafina interjected with a flick of her wrist. "Oh, she does something with eco-trash startups, I think. It's like a fancy compost thing, but for commercial spaces." Nervous laughter trickled around the table, like someone had just spilled a glass of sticky syrup. Julian added with a smirk, "Hey, at least you're doing your part for the environment." Catherine said nothing. She just adjusted her napkin on her lap, as if it had personally offended her. I sat there, a smile plastered on my face, pretending that it didn't sting, pretending that I hadn't spent the last 7 years building a multi-million-dollar business from absolutely nothing, pretending that I wasn't the reason they were able to sit in this very restaurant without having to go through a rigorous vetting process, pretending that I was just as disposable as they thought I was. My silence began to grow teeth. I excused myself, claiming I needed to use the restroom. My heels clicked steadily against the polished concrete floors as I walked toward the back hallway. I passed the kitchen window, where my team was plating with intense focus, where steam rose like a ritual, and where my fingerprints were on every single surface, though no one in that dining room knew it. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick had faded. My shoulders had slumped forward slightly. I stood up straight, tucked a loose strand of hair back into place, and I looked myself right in the eye. CEO, I whispered, founder, owner. 3 words, not decorations, not defenses, just facts. I stayed in there long enough to let the weight of those words settle back into my bones. Not because I doubted them, but because I needed to remember that I hadn't climbed this far just to shrink under their shallow, dismissive gazes. When I returned to the table, nothing had changed. The conversation had moved on to travel plans and registry gifts. But I was not the same person who had left. I slid back into my chair, adjusted my napkin, and folded my hands in my lap. My smile was still there, but the silence inside me had transformed. It was no longer fear, it was preparation. The dinner dragged on, feeling more like a corporate board meeting with no clear agenda. It was just a collection of faces around a polished table, all pretending there was some purpose to the repetition. Every topic of conversation revolved around Serafina and Julian. The dress, the venue, whether the signature cocktail should be a cucumber mint spritz or something a little less predictable. Serafina's voice dripped with an exaggerated poise, and she never missed an opportunity to redirect the conversation back to herself. She even interrupted Julian mid-sentence to boast about how well-connected her stylist was. Julian, to his credit, played along like a seasoned professional. He peppered his sentences with phrases like brand synergy and strategic alliances, trying far too hard to sound important in a room that had already decided he was. I sat still, a silent observer of the performance. My fork moved absently, pushing a slice of roasted beet across my plate. I wondered how many dinners just like this one I had endured over the years. Different walls, different faces, but always the same script. Everyone just waiting for the right moment to say the thing that would get them invited to the next event. Catherine reached for her water glass and turned to me, a carefully practiced smile on her face. "By the way, I used that journal you gave me," she said, as if that would somehow tie me into the rest of their conversation. I looked up. "It's very practical," she continued. "It held up quite well with my cleaning supplies. I tossed in a few scrub brushes, some gloves. It's a good utility bag." My throat tightened, but I didn't flinch. That journal was bound in custom leather, embossed with the motto I had chosen after 2 long years of building Terra Nova. "It's not waste, it's the future." Serafina caught my expression and smirked, her eyes glinting over the rim of her wine glass. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. Her silence was seasoned, a form of cruelty wrapped in quiet disdain. The journal had been a Mother's Day gift, a gesture that was meant to be more than just utilitarian. It was my way of saying, "I'm not who you thought I'd be, but I'm proud of who I am." And just like that, Catherine had reduced it to a caddy for her cleaning supplies. Before I could respond, Maria appeared beside me with a pitcher of sparkling water. She moved with a quiet, unassuming grace. Her hair was pulled back in a simple twist, but her eyes were sharper than most people noticed. She leaned in closer than she had to anyone else at the table that night, speaking just loud enough for only me to hear. "I still use the leadership notes you printed out for me." Then she poured the water gently, not waiting for any acknowledgement. Maria was one of the first women I had hired when I opened the second Terra Nova location. She had been out of work for over a year, raising 2 children on her own. I had seen something in her, the ability to lead with warmth but command with a quiet calm. And she had more than delivered on that potential. Her whisper was more than just gratitude. It was a reminder, a piece of proof. As she walked away, I straightened my shoulders. A man from across the table, someone Serafina had introduced earlier as a friend from Dartmouth, looked in my direction. "Eleonora, right? What do you do again?" My mouth opened to answer, but Serafina beat me to it. "She runs some kind of non-profit recycling thing," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's like a community startup or something. Definitely not corporate, but cute." A few chuckles drifted up from the table like smoke from a dying fire. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his eyes scanning the contents of his wineglass. I let the silence sit. I let them assume my silence was agreement, not strategy. She had called it cute, the business that had saved entire buildings from mold infestations, that had helped school districts lower their waste costs by 40%, that had provided clean, stable jobs for single parents like Maria. Cute. It wasn't the lie that stung. It was the erasure. The way they were rewriting my reality in real time to fit their comfortable narrative. I reached for my phone, placing it face down on the linen tablecloth. My thumb pressed against the side, activating the screen. A single notification hovered there. My TEDx talk had just crossed 350,000 views. I excused myself, claiming I had to take a call. No one questioned it. Outside, the air had cooled. The breeze carried the scent of rosemary and citrus from the rooftop garden we maintained for seasonal herbs. I walked to the far edge of the patio, past the soft, ambient lighting and the faint clinking of glasses from other diners. There was a stone bench tucked under a small olive tree. I sat down, my thumb hovering over the video. For a brief second, I considered deleting it. The old voice in my head, the one that still echoed from countless teenage dinners and parent-teacher conferences, told me I was being too proud, that I should just let it go. But another voice, steadier now, louder with each passing year, said something else. They can call me whatever they want. They can mislabel my work, laugh at it, minimize it. I tapped the video once and watched my own face appear on the screen. The talk had been impromptu, given 3 years ago after another speaker had canceled at the last minute. I had spoken about the dignity in overlooked work, about how we measure a person's worth by their title, not by their impact, about how some of the dirtiest jobs often leave the cleanest footprints. I watched for exactly 90 seconds. Then I locked the phone. They will speak my name before this night is over, I whispered, not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth. When I returned to the table, the atmosphere had shifted. It was subtle, like the way a room changes when someone has left and no one bothers to mention it. My chair gave a faint squeak as I slid back into place. The sound was barely audible, but it was enough to draw everyone's eyes. I held Serafina's gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. She was the first to look away. The plates had been cleared. Next came the main course, pan-seared scallops on a bed of herbed lentils, topped with a delicate onion reduction glaze. It was the kind of dish that had taken 6 weeks of rigorous testing in my kitchen to perfect. The kind of detail that no one at this table would ever think I was capable of approving, let alone creating. Serafina's fork hovered over her plate, her nose wrinkled in disdain. "I thought I said no onions," she said, her voice sharp enough to draw glances from the neighboring table. Julian leaned closer to her. "Is this a problem?" "They used a fermented glaze," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "No raw ingredients. It was infused for 48 hours. But if it's a concern, we can prepare something else for you." Our server, Jessica, froze for a moment, looking to me for guidance. I gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Serafina was already flustered. "It's fine," she said quickly, pushing the plate an inch forward. "I'll manage." Julian, ever the opportunist, tried to lighten the mood. "Just shows you how hands-on she still is, huh?" he said, gesturing toward me with a laugh. Serafina forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Catherine adjusted her bracelet again, the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Still running that little operation of yours?" Serafina asked as she dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Or did you finally decide that sanitation wasn't your true path?" The jab was expected, but something about the word sanitation stuck with me this time. The way she said it, as if it had dirt under its fingernails. I kept my tone perfectly even. "We're not just running it. We're expanding. 3 new partnerships this quarter, one with the City Council, another with a regional medical network." Serafina tilted her head. "Well, look at you," Catherine cut in with a soft, condescending chuckle. "It's good to stay busy, dear." I didn't answer. I let the stillness settle around us instead. Just then, a man from another table stood and approached ours. He was in his late 40s, wearing a navy suit, his wedding ring worn to the bone. His presence was confident, but not intrusive. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the entire group. "I just wanted to compliment the staff. The attention to detail, the scent in the air, the way the lighting flatters the space. It's all incredibly thoughtful. You don't get that everywhere." He then turned to me. "This feels like your vibe. Are you part of the concept here?" Before anyone could interrupt, I smiled. "You could say that." He nodded appreciatively. "Well, whoever's behind it, kudos. It's intentional." respectful. As he walked away, Julian let out a low whistle. You get that a lot? Not often enough, I said. The conversation seemed to slow down after that. Even Serafina had lost her momentum. Catherine busied herself with her wine, her fingers turning the stem of her glass as if she were trying to wind back time. Richard was completely absorbed in his phone, probably checking market alerts or rereading his own company's press release from a decade ago. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the scene. The chandelier above us, made from repurposed brass beams I had sourced from a Charleston shipyard. The music, custom curated by my team to mirror the pace of each course. The floor plan, which I had redesigned twice to balance the acoustics with a sense of intimacy, and not a single one of them saw it. Not really. They had walked into my space believing it was just another backdrop for their perfectly curated evening. Just another restaurant, just another luxury venue to stamp Serafina's image on. But every single detail screamed me, my decisions, my sweat, my vision. If they won't hear the warning, I thought, my fingers brushing against the edge of my plate, they'll feel the shift. I didn't say it aloud. Not yet. But the table had already started to listen, whether they knew it or not. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when the tension climbs just high enough for everyone to feel it, but no one is brave enough to name it. That's the space we all sat in as the dessert menus loomed, but no one reached for them. I noticed the way my family started to speak more carefully, how Catherine leaned forward, trying desperately to regain control of the atmosphere, like a conductor attempting to salvage an off-key orchestra. She laughed a little too brightly. I've already spoken to the florist. You'll want someone to screen them, Serafina. Not everyone survives their first try at a wedding. Her eyes flicked in my direction, just long enough to confirm the intended target. The temperature at the table dropped a few degrees. Even Serafina paused, her spoon halfway to her lips. I placed my glass down carefully, letting the stem touch the linen before I answered. Sometimes, surviving the wrong choice is the real win. A small, sharp gasp came from someone at the table. Maybe Chloe. Serafina let out an awkward chuckle and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Julian looked around, as if hoping someone else would change the subject for him. Catherine blinked, her smile stretched tight. Well, she said, reaching for her water glass, no one's perfect. Julian turned to Serafina with a kind of charm that felt a little too polished. This place really is perfect for tonight. Classy, upscale, but still grounded, you know? Exactly, Serafina beamed. It's sustainable without feeling like a school cafeteria. Elegant, but with a heart. They spent a year sourcing biodegradable slateware, I offered, letting the words hang in the air. Serafina nodded. That's what you get when professionals are in charge. Julian clinked his fork against his plate and chuckled. Crazy how far you've come from hauling trash, huh? I didn't blink. I didn't wince. I just stared straight at him. Yeah, Serafina added, her lips curling at the corners. At least she's not sorting bins anymore. There it was. My smile remained steady as I set down my fork. You're right, I said. I no longer sort. I own the system now. Catherine coughed into her napkin. Julian's grin faltered. Serafina's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she caught herself and leaned back, pretending as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. People like to imagine that success comes in straight lines, I said, my voice calm but clear. That the titles are what matter. But sometimes it's the hands that got dirty that built the very foundation you're all standing on. I looked around the table at their frozen faces, all of them pretending to be unfazed. This restaurant, the materials, The air quality system, the chef who trained the staff you're all praising. Those weren't choices made by a committee. They were mine. No one moved. Maybe next time you wonder who signs the checks for places like this, I added, my voice low and steady. Remember that it might just be the person you least expect. Catherine's hand, which had been mid-reach for her wineglass, stopped dead in the air. The silence that followed my last sentence wasn't passive. It was suffocating. Catherine's hand, frozen in its mid-reach for her glass, trembled ever so slightly before she retreated it to her lap. I didn't expect a response from them. Honestly, I preferred the quiet. It left them alone with their own thoughts, the ones they never allowed to surface. Julian attempted a laugh, but the sound came out sharp and unnatural. "Well, I think this place has great energy," he said, lifting his glass as if that could somehow reset the entire table. Serafina leaned toward Catherine, whispering something too soft for me to catch, but her posture had stiffened. Gone was the easy, entitled slouch of the golden child. She sat perfectly upright now, her shoulders rigid, her eyes tracking my every move. Jessica, our lead server, returned to clear the plates. When she took mine, she met my gaze and gave a subtle, respectful nod. We both knew exactly what was unfolding here. Catherine cleared her throat and tried again. "The decor is truly stunning," she said. "It's refined without being sterile. Whoever designed this space should be very proud." "They should," I replied evenly. Richard, who had been largely absent from the evening's drama, suddenly looked up from his phone. "I'd like to meet the owner," he said. "Give them our compliments. It's rare to find a place that strikes this kind of balance." Serafina perked up. "Yes, we should thank them personally. A handwritten note, perhaps. Make sure we're invited back." I tilted my head slightly. "They know," I said. "You've been thanking them all night." It took a moment for the words to sink in. Catherine's smile faltered like a candle flickering in a draft. Her eyes narrowed, trying to process, or more accurately, trying to resist processing what I had just said. Richard just blinked, confused. Jessica returned with wine for the final course, placing the glass in front of me first. "Miss Eleonora, your reserve," she said gently. Julian's gaze snapped to her. "Miss Eleonora?" he echoed. "Of course," Jessica said brightly, either completely unaware or perfectly aware of the storm that was now gathering just beneath the surface. Julian squinted at me. "You're the—" He didn't finish his sentence. "I thought I reached out to your team a few years ago," he muttered. "About Terra Nova? I was trying to pitch an investment strategy. Never heard back." "You did," I said simply. "Oh," he said, his voice barely audible. "So that was—" Another pause. Just then, the doors near the bar opened, and Victoria walked in. Every time I saw her, she looked like she belonged at the head of a boardroom table, a vision of power in pearl earrings. She was wearing a navy wrap coat, a silk scarf at her throat, and the kind of confidence that doesn't ask for permission to enter a room. She walked straight to our table, stopping at my side. "I heard you were dining here tonight," she said, her voice cutting through the awkward tension like a violin in a room full of broken instruments. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "I owe so much to this woman." Serafina blinked. Catherine tilted her head, her throat visibly tightening. "Victoria." I rose slightly, enough to acknowledge her, but not to overpower the moment. "Glad you could make it." "You've outdone yourself," she said, gesturing to the room, then back to the table. "And if this is your family, they should be very proud." No one said a word. The investors at the neighboring table, who had overheard pieces of this slow motion unraveling, were now looking over with open curiosity. Jessica came back again, this time with the dessert menu. She handed one to me first. As the plates clinked and chairs shifted, I sat back and looked at each of them. Richard staring at his hands. Catherine, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Serafina, flushed and unnaturally still. And Julian, now deeply engrossed in the empty stem of his wine glass. None of them looked at me with pity anymore. They looked at me as if they were seeing me for the very first time. And maybe they were. They had been sitting in my shadow all along. For a moment, no one moved. Catherine's hand still hovered over her wine glass, as if she was unsure whether to finish her sip or simply disappear behind the stem. The low hum of conversation that had once danced lightly between the courses had completely vanished. All that remained was the soft, pulsing tension of everyone trying to act as if they hadn't just witnessed their carefully curated evening fall completely out of sync. Julian cleared his throat, the way men do when they want to reset a room but have absolutely no idea how. Serafina kept her gaze locked on her water glass, her fingers tracing the rim as if it held all the answers. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The words I had offered moments ago were still circling them, unanswered, unchallenged, just present. And for once, their silence said more than their carefully crafted scripts ever could. Then, from the table to our right, a woman in a deep green silk blouse stood up. She was in her 50s, with a composure that made others instinctively sit a little straighter when she moved. She approached Daniel near the host stand and spoke just loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Excuse me," she said with a polite smile, nodding toward our table. "What's the owner doing dining with guests tonight?" Every fork in the room seemed to pause mid-air. Richard looked up, blinking. Serafina visibly stiffened. Daniel didn't even flinch. "Ms. Eleonora requested to dine discreetly this evening," he answered calmly, then glanced toward me with a knowing tilt of his head. The woman followed his gaze and offered me a subtle, appreciative nod. "Smart of her," she said, before returning to her seat without another word. Catherine leaned toward Serafina. "What's happening?" she whispered urgently. Serafina said nothing. Then came the moment I hadn't planned, the one I hadn't orchestrated, but welcomed all the same. "Wait," said Chloe's son. Eli, I think, the tech-savvy cousin who hadn't looked up from his phone for most of the evening. "I've seen you before, that TED Talk, about dignity and labor." He tapped something on his screen, and a moment later, the large wall-mounted monitor above the dessert station flickered to life. I watched as my own face appeared on the screen, calm, focused, and lit by stage lights I had almost forgotten. The entire room fell completely silent. In the video, I was talking about invisible labor, about how sanitation, hospitality, and care work were the scaffolding of our society, not the scraps. I told stories, some of them mine, some of them borrowed with permission, of women like Maria who had rebuilt their lives from behind mop buckets and checklists. The video ended, and then the impossible happened. A slow, deliberate clap from a table in the far left corner, then another and another. Soon, a soft chorus of applause moved through the room. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't performative. It was honest. The kind of clapping that comes when people realize they've missed something important and are trying, however awkwardly, to catch up. Victoria had slid into the empty chair next to me somewhere during all of this. She leaned over and whispered, "You didn't even have to raise your voice." I kept my eyes on Serafina, who was now rigid in her chair, her cheeks flushed with an emotion she couldn't mask with posture or powder. "You've been hiding this?" she asked quietly, her voice almost cracking. I didn't blink. "No," I said. "You've just been refusing to see it." Catherine cleared her throat again, but this time she said nothing. Her hands stayed clasped in her lap. Richard pushed his chair back slightly from the table, his face unreadable. I took a sip of my water. Not wine, not tonight. I wanted clarity. I didn't come here to prove anything, I said, my voice carrying more to the room than just to them. I just stopped apologizing for succeeding in a way you didn't recognize. No one reached for a rebuttal. They knew. The applause faded. The room quieted down again. But it wasn't their restaurant anymore. It was mine. It always had been. Catherine was the first to break the silence. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a wire pulled taut. "Is this your place? All of this?" Her eyes scanned the walls, the staff, even the plates on the table, as if she had only just realized she'd been sitting inside something entirely unfamiliar, wearing a costume of comfort. I met her gaze without flinching. Yes, it always was. No one spoke. The quiet wasn't hollow anymore. It was sharp, like glass, waiting for someone to press too hard and crack it. Even the soft clinking of plates from across the dining room seemed amplified. The light from the chandelier warmed the table, but no one reached for their drinks. I rose from my chair, not dramatically, but with a clear sense of purpose. Every pair of eyes followed me. "You asked if this was mine," I said, not just to Catherine, but to the entire table. "And yes, it is, but not because I needed a title or a spotlight. I built this out of the nights no one saw. When I left the bakery at 3 a.m., my hands raw and my back aching, and went straight to a prep kitchen just to learn how to survive in a world that didn't make space for women like me." Serafina looked away. I kept going. This wasn't charity. This wasn't someone handing me a second chance. This was scraped together with rent overdue, credit cards maxed out, and more burned risottos than I care to admit. Richard blinked as if he was trying to interrupt, but I didn't give him the chance. "I didn't want to be impressive," I said, my voice steady. "I just wanted to be respected." There was a pause long enough for everyone to shift uncomfortably in their seats. I watched Julian fidget with his napkin. Serafina's hand was clenched into a tight fist in her lap. The screen behind the bar, which was usually reserved for sports or ambient visuals, flared to life again. The TEDx clip resumed from where it had paused earlier. It wasn't a cue I had given, but it felt as if the room itself needed the reminder. My recorded voice filled the space. The world doesn't need more CEOs in glass towers. It needs more people willing to clean it, both outside and in. The applause started again, hesitant at first, then growing steady. A couple at the neighboring table stood and clapped slowly. A man from across the room gave me a thumbs up. Even Daniel, who rarely broke his professional form, nodded from his position near the kitchen door. My family didn't move. Catherine's expression was unreadable, as if she was trying to rearrange every assumption she'd ever had about me, and none of the pieces fit anymore. Serafina's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "So you just sat here through this whole night, waiting to make us feel small?" I turned to her. "Number. I sat here hoping just once that you would see me. But you didn't. And now it doesn't matter." She blinked rapidly, her jaw clenched tight. I stepped back from the table. Victoria had already risen and was standing nearby, ready but not rushing me. There was nothing left to rush. I gathered my purse, not in a hurry, not storming off, just done. "I'll see you at the next meeting, Miss Eleonora," Victoria said softly as she reached for my elbow. I looked back at them one last time. Not for an apology, not for approval, just for a flicker of acknowledgement. Even now, none came. "This time," I said quietly, "I'll send the check." The lights had dimmed. Most of the plates were gone. The music was barely a whisper now. The other guests had trickled out quietly, leaving behind wine-streaked glasses and untouched desserts. I sat alone at the table where my family had once huddled like royalty, now surrounded by empty chairs and folded napkins. I swirled the last of my wine in my glass, watching the ripples form small circles before disappearing. The echo of voices drifted in from the hallway. Catherine and Richard, their murmured argument muted by the distance, but sharp enough to carry the tone of accusation. Even now they argued without saying it, without saying my name. They still won't say my name out loud, I whispered to myself. The staff was moving through the cleanup quietly, like stage hands resetting a theater after the show had irrevocably changed the audience. The clatter of cutlery had a rhythm to it now, one that didn't ask for approval or attention. Serafina had left without a single word. No eye contact, no final jab. She had simply stood up, clutched her handbag like a lifeline, and walked out. Julian had followed her, his expression unreadable, not even glancing in my direction. Victoria had sat across from me for a moment, her posture as steady as her presence. She had leaned in just enough to speak low. "Now comes the part they won't show up for," she had said. The silence. I had nodded once, grateful for her clarity. She had squeezed my hand gently before standing to leave. "You did more than just speak tonight," she had added. "You changed the story." Catherine passed by me not long after, her eyes carefully focused on a point somewhere beyond me. She walked slowly, her chin tilted upward, her arms crossed as if she were bracing for a cold breeze that never came. Not a glance, not a word, just an exit. I let her go. A few minutes later, Maria appeared. She wore her apron loose now, a bit of hair escaping from her bun. She began clearing our table, moving with that same quiet confidence. I remembered when I had first interviewed her. She paused, glanced at me, then reached into her apron pocket and slipped a folded napkin onto the table. I looked down. In neat, clear handwriting were 5 words: "We knew before they did." I folded the napkin and slipped it into my clutch. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I stayed seated for a while longer, not to bask in any sense of victory, but just to breathe. I replayed the night in my head, not the jabs or the insults, but the shifts. The moment Julian realized he had pitched to me, and not to some man behind me. The flicker in Serafina's eyes when the applause wasn't for her. Catherine's blink when Victoria used my name without a hint of hesitation. There was no joy in the memory, no surge of triumph. "I didn't want to beat them," I whispered. "I wanted them to understand. But sometimes understanding costs too much, and maybe they just weren't ready to pay the price." I stood up slowly. I walked through the restaurant like a guest, not an owner. I ran my hand along the polished wood of the hostess stand I had designed. I paused at the custom lighting fixture that hung above the center table, the one I had fought so hard to have made by a local artisan. These weren't declarations of success. They were choices, years and years of them. I made my way to the back of the house, where the staff was finishing up. I nodded to Daniel, who nodded back, saying nothing, but with everything in his eyes. I returned to the dining area, now dim and silent, and looked at the space one last time that evening. "Tomorrow, we prep for lunch at 11, I said aloud, not to anyone else, but to myself. 2 days had passed, and the silence was louder than any dinner toast. My phone didn't buzz that morning. No text from Catherine, no voicemail from Richard, no guilt-laced apology from Serafina. Just a profound stillness, the kind of stillness that says everything. I sat at the kitchen counter of my apartment, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The clip from that night, my TEDx talk, the one the world had forgotten until it was no longer convenient to ignore, was circulating online. Someone had uploaded it to a local community platform with the title, "She cleaned up more than just trash." I wasn't tagged, but it didn't matter. People knew. I watched the view count climb as I sat barefoot in my robe, unsure if I felt vindicated or simply hollowed out. Sometimes when a dam breaks, it doesn't flood, it just drains. Later that afternoon, a friend forwarded me a link. Serafina's name was trending on a Charleston social media account. A whispered post claimed that her fiancé's firm had abruptly pulled out of a strategic investment deal with another sustainability group, citing conflicts of interest. The caption was brutal, from wedding bells to business hells. That same morning, Julian sent a text. No greeting, no context. "I never meant to offend you. It was a misunderstanding. I didn't respond." What was there to clarify? He had known exactly what he was doing when he had laughed, when he had joined in. Misunderstandings don't come in the form of public humiliation. By noon, I noticed that Serafina had unfollowed me on every social media platform. I clicked on her profile, stared for a beat, and then closed the app. The custom journal I had once given to Catherine, the one she had dismissed as practical for cleaning supplies, had somehow made its way into a newspaper feature. A journalist had found the quote printed on it. "It's not waste, it's the future," and had built an entire piece around it, calling it the mission statement of an overlooked movement. The article didn't mention the dinner, but it didn't need to. A young designer in Atlanta had already mocked up T-shirts and digital posters, quoting the line beneath abstract sketches of women in aprons and lab coats. For once, they weren't invisible. Catherine called around 4:30. I recognized the number immediately. I let it ring once, twice, and then picked up. "Eleonora," she began, her voice clipped but calm. "You embarrassed us, but you did well." I leaned back in my chair. "You don't have to be proud of me, Mother," I said. "Just stop pretending I never existed." There was a pause, just a breath. Then the call ended. No goodbye, no pause to let the silence settle, just gone. I stood up, pulled on my blazer, and headed to the office. By early evening, Victoria had emailed. Terra Nova was being featured in an upcoming Women of Reinvention issue. The headline was short and sharp, from trash to triumph. She ended the message with a single line, "This is only the beginning." I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 2 days. No one clapped, no camera flashed, but inside, a small voice I hadn't heard since childhood whispered something real. "You've already lived past them." 3 days had passed since the dinner. The air in my office felt different now, more mine than ever. Not because anything monumental had shifted overnight, but because I had. The lobby was quiet, the staff moved with a calm efficiency, and every nod or soft smile from them reminded me that I didn't need applause to know I belonged here. As I stepped into my office at Terra Nova HQ that morning, a few heads looked up. A couple of morning, Ms. Eleonora greetings reached my ears. Not overly formal, just sincere. There was no grand acknowledgement of what had unfolded, and that was perfect. I spent the first hour reviewing media requests, brand partnership proposals, and 3 local schools requesting mentorship collaborations. The Women of Reinvention feature was already being formatted for layout. A photo of me in the greenhouse, sleeves rolled up, watering basil, quiet, authentic. That was the version of myself I had longed for someone to see years ago. Now, the world was beginning to catch up. Around noon, my brother Ethan showed up unannounced. He looked uncomfortable in his business casual khakis, holding a coffee he had clearly bought just to have something in his hands. "Got a minute?" he asked, hovering by the doorway. I nodded, sure. We sat at the small table in the corner of my office, the one that tends to intimidate visitors less than the big desk. Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees like he did when we were kids, and he'd stolen the last cookie but didn't want to confess. "I didn't get it," he started. "Not when you dropped out. Not when you said no to Dad's offer. I thought you were just being difficult." I didn't interrupt. He looked at me, his eyes steadier than I remembered. "But I watched you the other night. You weren't performing. You were just solid, like you'd been that person all along, and I was the one who never saw it." I breathed in slowly. "Why now, Ethan?" He gave a weak smile. "Because I was scared to choose wrong. You weren't. That deserves respect. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But in that moment, something unspoken softened between us. Not everything can be repaired, but it can be acknowledged." That afternoon, Catherine invited me to brunch. A text message, not a call. "Neutral ground," it said. The phrase almost made me laugh. Still, I went. We met at a quiet bistro in East Charleston, the kind with reclaimed wood tables and artisanal tea that looked more like soup. She wore pearls and a crisp blouse, as if she wanted to project elegance without effort. I wore jeans and a blazer. We both knew what this was. She didn't ease into it. "You embarrassed us," she said over her chai, "but you did it with elegance." I folded my napkin in half. "I stopped needing your praise the day I started building without it." She blinked, but didn't flinch. There was something almost respectful in her silence. We sat like that for a minute, two women who had once tried to shape each other into something tolerable. Now, we simply coexisted, like two statues facing different directions in the same garden. "I was proud of you once," she said finally, "when you won that writing award in 7th grade." I met her eyes. "You're allowed to be proud again, but not if it means rewriting the past." She nodded slowly. "That's fair." I pushed my cup away. "You're my mother, but that doesn't give you the right to narrate my life." Catherine opened her mouth, then closed it again. No apology came. Just a small, almost reluctant nod. Outside, the sun was finally pushing past the clouds. We stood, neither of us reaching to hug. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken either. I just felt like myself. The door's not locked, but they'll knock next time. The scent of basil greeted me first, clean and fresh, like the promise of a new beginning. The greenhouse above the Terra Nova test kitchen pulsed with life. Morning light sifted through the skylights, casting soft green shadows on the walkway. My fingertips brushed across the leaves as I walked slowly between the rows of herbs. Mint, oregano, thyme, all thriving, all cared for. Below, I could hear the muffled clatter of prep, laughter bubbling up occasionally, someone teasing someone else, someone singing off-key. The hum of a kitchen before service always carried a current, but today, it wasn't anxious. It was steady. I didn't need to direct anymore. I just needed to be present. In the adjacent event space, we'd arranged a long, handmade wooden table for our monthly mentorship brunch. The women seated there were varied in age and background. Some were still in community college, while others were already working part-time jobs and caring for siblings or their own children. Each of them held notebooks, not phones. Their attention wasn't performative, it was hungry. One of the younger girls, maybe 19, raised her hand shyly during our QA. "Did you always know you'd end up here?" I smiled and shook my head. Not at all. But I always knew where I didn't want to stay. That earned a few nods, a few smiles of shared understanding. I told them about my early days, scrubbing floors with cracked hands, counting coins to pay for night classes, applying for grants under a pseudonym because my family name opened doors I didn't want favors from. I told them about failing, and not the polished kind of failure people love to romanticize. Real, gutting, silent failure, and how I built anyway. Toward the end of our session, someone from the team rushed in quietly and handed me an iPad. "It just went live," she whispered. On the screen was an international sustainability campaign banner from the UN with a bold headline, "Not Waste Future." And just below it, a photo of the tote bag we had once printed for a community cleanup. Now, it was the campaign's central visual. Victoria had already texted, "Told you, you're a global ambassador now." I laughed quietly, tapping back a single thumbs-up emoji. That was enough. Later that day, as the kitchen staff began prepping for the evening, I stepped into my office and paused at the small corkboard by my desk. There, already pinned among sticky notes and to-do lists, was a florist receipt. I had sent flowers to Serafina's wedding. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt. The card had read, "For the next generation, make space at the table." I hadn't expected a thank you, and none had come. I turned to the glass wall that overlooked the prep line. Today, the people I saw were not employees. They were chosen family. Every one of them had weathered something. Every one of them showed up. A young girl, one of the newest mentees, appeared at the door, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. "I drew this," she said shyly, "for you." Inside was a sketch of a woman in chef whites, standing tall, holding a globe in one hand and a broom in the other. My eyes watered, but I blinked once and smiled. I taped it right next to the campaign banner. As the day wound down and the sun dipped low, casting a golden light across the countertop, I walked back into the kitchen. There was one seat left empty across the prep line, a quiet spot I used to sit in during my earliest days. I stared at it for a beat, remembering the nights I thought no one would ever recognize the worth behind the work. Then I whispered, just loud enough to feel real, "Set the next table. This one's done." Sometimes the people closest to us won't see who we are until the world forces them to look. And sometimes, even then, they still won't. But the lesson I've learned, the one I want to leave with you, is this. You don't need their permission to become who you were meant to be. You don't owe anyone a seat at your table if they never asked what it took to build it. I spent years trying to earn approval from people who never saw past my silence. What I didn't realize was that their silence was never proof of my failure. It was just proof of their fear. Fear of a different path. Fear of a woman who built without asking. And once I stopped trying to fit their version of success, I started living mine. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been told your work doesn't count, your dreams are too small, or that you're not enough, I hope this story reminds you, you are already worthy. You don't need applause to have impact. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a line between who you are and who your family wanted you to be? Or maybe you're still trying to find that line. Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments. Or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, I'd still like to hear why. Your thoughts matter. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. Someone out there needs the reminder you just heard. Take care. Keep building. Keep choosing yourself.